In the winter of 1969, inside a design studio in Turin, a young stylist named Paolo Martin was supposed to be refining the elegant, restrained curves of a Rolls-Royce, and instead he kept sneaking back at night to work on something else entirely. A shape so extreme, so alien, so completely disconnected from anything the automotive world had ever produced, that when his own boss finally saw it, the president of the company told him flatly that it was too futuristic, that it would embarrass the brand sitting next to more conventional designs, and Martin refused to let it die, continuing to develop the shape on his own time even as his superiors made clear their reservations. And that stubborn, after-hours obsession would eventually become the Ferrari V12 S Modulo, a car so far ahead of its era that even now, more than 5 decades later, people who see it in person for the first time still assume it must be a movie prop rather than a real, functioning automobile. And it's worth pausing on just how unusual it was for a stylist at a major Italian coach builder to essentially defy his own company's instincts and keep pushing a rejected concept forward anyway. Because Pininfarina in the late 1960s was already one of the most respected design houses in the world, responsible for penning some of Ferrari's most elegant and commercially important road cars, and Sergio Pininfarina himself had built that reputation in part by knowing when a design idea had gone too far. So for Martin to essentially bet his professional judgment against his own boss's instincts tells you something about how genuinely convinced he was that this shape mattered. And to understand just how radical this thing actually was, you have to start with what it was built from. Because in the late 1960s, Ferrari had constructed 25 examples of the 512S endurance racer specifically to satisfy homologation rules for competition. Cars built at Enzo Ferrari's own headquarters in Maranello as part of a genuinely serious sports racing program meant to challenge Porsche on some of the most demanding circuits in the world, including Le Mans and the Sebring 12-hour, along with a handful of spare chassis, and one of those leftover chassis, number 27, was handed over to the design house Pininfarina, not to build another race car, but to build something that had never really existed before, a rolling sculpture engineered around a genuine 5-liter, 550-horsepower Ferrari V12 sitting behind the driver. And what Paolo Martin did with that chassis broke almost every visual convention of automotive design at the time, because instead of a hood, fenders, and a windshield in any traditional sense, the Modulo was an almost impossibly low, flat wedge, barely 3 feet tall, with the front and rear wheels tucked into smooth, fully enclosed fairings that made the car look less like something with 4 separate tires, and more like a single continuous object gliding just above the road. And there were no conventional doors at all. Instead, the entire glass canopy over the cockpit slid forward on rails, exposing the seats from above, the way a fighter jet's cockpit opens, a detail so theatrical that even veteran designers who had seen every kind of concept car imaginable still remember being stunned by it. And the interior carried that same uncompromising vision through to the smallest details, with instrumentation and controls arranged less like a traditional dashboard and more like something out of contemporary science fiction illustration, reinforcing the sense that Martin wasn't simply styling a car so much as imagining an entirely different, almost extraterrestrial category of vehicle that happened to share a chassis with a Ferrari race car. And when the Modulo debuted at the Geneva Motor Show in March of 1970, it didn't just turn heads, it fundamentally rewired what people thought a supercar could look like. And the industry took notice almost immediately, because over the following years, the Modulo would go on to win 22 separate international design awards, an almost unheard-of total for a single concept vehicle that never entered production or saw a single customer. A testament to just how completely it captured the imagination of the automotive press and design juries across Europe and North America, and its pure wedge silhouette became a direct visual ancestor of some of the most legendary production supercars of the following decade. Cars like the Lamborghini Countach and later the Ferrari Testarossa clearly carry the Modulo's DNA in their sharp creases and low, aggressive stance. But here's the twist that explains why this particular car never had any realistic chance of reaching a showroom. Because the Modulo wasn't just visually extreme, it was mechanically and ergonomically almost absurd by any practical standard. The front wheels could only turn a few degrees in either direction, making the car nearly impossible to actually steer through a normal turn, a limitation that would have made even parking the thing a genuine engineering challenge. The ride height was so low that climbing in required genuine athletic flexibility, even with the sliding canopy fully open. And visibility from inside the cockpit was severely limited in every direction, with the driver essentially peering out through a narrow band of glass surrounded by acres of sculpted bodywork, meaning that whatever Pininfarina had created, it was never intended to be driven on a public road. It existed purely as a rolling design statement, a physical argument about where automotive styling could go if engineers were willing to ignore every rule of practicality. And for decades, that's exactly what it remained. A static, silent object, because although the Ferrari V12 sat visible under that dramatic glass canopy, the Modulo left Geneva without any of the mechanical connections needed to actually run. No functional fuel system, no complete exhaust, no drivetrain linkage. It was a beautiful, empty shell built purely for exhibition, and it toured international auto shows throughout the 1970s as one of the most photographed cars in the world, all while sitting completely inert, a 5,500-pound design icon that had never turned a wheel under its own power. A strange contradiction that only made the car more mythical among enthusiasts who followed it. A genuine supercar that existed almost entirely as an idea rather than a working machine. And Pininfarina held onto the car for decades afterward, occasionally rolling it out for anniversaries and retrospectives, but essentially treating it as a museum piece rather than an automobile. And that might have remained the Modulo's permanent fate, a beautiful ghost forever trapped behind velvet ropes, if not for a financial crisis that hit Pininfarina itself in the early 2010s, because the storied design house, the same studio responsible for decades of legendary Ferrari road cars from the 250 GT to the Testarossa,